Pleased to meet you. I'm Kevin Roach, the author.
My name is Pino from Italy. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Peter.
And we are talking about the Beatles and the lives and all your story of their life. What about George's family? Which connection have you found to collect information on the history, on relatives?
Yeah, it first come about when I was working for the Martin Scorsese film. After the produced, I was more and more involved with the making of the documentary, Living in a Material World. And I did explain to Martin Scorsese's company that I'll be doing a book myself of his family history. So the deal that we did was that Olivia Harrison would do her book first to complement the DVD and documentary. Then once she's done her book, then I'll bring my book out. So from that, I contacted George's sister Louise, who lives in America. She was very helpful with family photographs, her memories as well. But the problem with Louise was there was a 10-year gap between she'd moved from Liverpool over to America. She'd been married and moved. So from there, I got Louise's memories. And then I contacted George's cousin in Ireland, who lives in Dublin. And he also provided me with information and family photographs. And his cousin Audrey, she still lives in Liverpool, and she contacted me with her family memories. Then it just evolved from there. From the memories that they was telling me, I was going to look for any record of what they was telling me and finding the records. And then putting the records in the book. Like George's great-grandfather who died in the war, in the First War. Found a photograph of him in the Liverpool newspapers. And the story of his death as well was reported in the newspapers.
Have I read somewhere that George's granddad maybe was a gardener too?
Yeah,
so
that was on.
Would be a connection with.
That was on George's other side, on the French, because
Yeah.
they was from Ireland. So it was the French side who came from Ireland, and the Harrisons who came from Birmingham. They was English, and it was Joseph French, who was a gardener for the estate in Crosby, Great Crosby. He was the official gardener, but he died in around about 1891, 1892. But being the head gardener and then looking at George's later life, when George decides to become a head gardener of Friar Park, it's that little connection in the family that George didn't know, that his great-grandfather was also a gardener as well at Great Crosby, on one of the big estates in Merseyside. When I started doing the George documentary and also the George book, not a lot had been written about George, not a lot of research had been going on about George. And what I found was George was really influential in the beginnings of the Beatles, because whereas John and Paul, they was happy to either stay in Fortland Road or in Mendip and write songs together. There's quite a lot of historical photographs where you can see them inside the houses writing songs. George was actually out and about with his guitar. He was jumping in with other groups, jamming with other groups, looking for a gig anyway. And it was George that was instrumental in getting the gig at the Casbah Club. So when the Beatles had broken up after Hamburg, it was George again who was instrumental in getting the Beatles back together, getting John and Paul back together to do another gig. So George, even though he was the quiet one, he was the one who was determined in the early years of the Beatles. And what I found out later was that the media, they only wanted to speak to John and Paul. So George took backseat and let John and Paul take all the interviews, talk about the records, the songs they wrote and stuff like that. So George was happy at that point. He'd achieved what he wanted to achieve in being a guitarist. He wants to be a guitarist most of all in the band. The first two records was by George, believe it or not. The first two Beatles records was by George. The first one was In Spite of All the Danger, which was he done when he was 15 and 16. That was written by George Harrison and Paul McCartney, who was credited on the record. The second one was in Hamburg, and once again that was credited as George Harrison and John Lennon. So the first two recorded singles was George Harrison. So George was credited as the songwriter, not Lennon and McCartney.